Forward. The following story is not meant for children. There will be uncensored swearing, themes of self-hatred, and graphic depictions of violence. Viewer discretion is advised. The Godeater, the Crossroads, Saki, Tenki, and Miss X are all owned by Vashley and the Summer League's organizers. Quinn and Associated Works are owned by Wooden Sponge. Summer League's Round 1, Chapter 2.
It's a night of wishful thinkers here in the Crossroads as competitors line up to an exclusive party after the announcement of the bracket,
exclaimed a sprightly, translucent woman with pink hair. She bounced playfully along a closed path in front of the fox's den. People were cheering and crying, taking pictures, clamoring for more.
I love you, Miss X!
cried one of the people in the crowd.
We have people coming far and wide in search of an exclusive wish, courtesy of the Godeater. During a challenge like this, it's always important to remember what we're fighting for.
She turned to a ragged-looking person, perhaps a little over half the size of a regular human. The hologram held a non-existent microphone out for them to speak.
So, why don't you tell us what you'd wish for if you win?
Her smile was bubbly and excited as the person looked up at her.
Fight me!
They spat before stepping grumpily into the bar. The idol let out a light laugh, seeming unbothered by the interaction.
Spicy people we have here today, right, Crossroads?
There was a cheer that erupted from the crowd. Quinn watched from the side, thinking she didn't want to be here right now. Well, technically she did. The Windraiser had been hoping Miss X would watch the stars with her again so they could talk. It had probably been the most peaceful part of her time in the Crossroads. Now she was here, standing in front of a crowd of flashing lights and clamoring people, all with hundreds of questions that she couldn't answer and all insisting that their attention was the most important.
Well, coming up next, it looks like we have someone that I'm very familiar with.
Miss X turned to see Quinn, who had begun to make her way up to the hologram with loud, thudding feet. She had to navigate carefully lest her shoulder slap a random person in the face. She'd been trained to kill people with the swing of a hammer. She hadn't been taught how to handle a crowd. It reminded her of a battlefield, but she had no arms to swing with. Her heart, closed behind a steel dome and hidden behind her armor, began to put out more and more cold from the stress of the situation. The added cold caused the condensation in this abysmal humidity to build up on her metal head and roll with an uncomfortable warmth down the back of her neck and freeze in the nooks and crannies of her armor. It probably looked like sweating now that she thought about it. And now to top it all off, Miss X had been standing there with an expectant smile and cheerful pose as she held a translucent microphone up to the beleaguered Windraiser's mouth as she scrambled for anything to say.
Hello,
Quinn stated quietly across the din of the milling crowd. An uproar flew through the citizens of the Crossroads as they let out a wild array of cheers and hoops and hollers, all directed at Quinn, who still had no idea how to handle the situation. Her position as a Windraiser was one of shame for a fault committed long, long ago. She wasn't supposed to be the subject of adoration. That was more for her betters, like Miss X. Perhaps these people of the Crossroads were stupid.
A woman of few words but decisive action,
Miss X said cheerfully, giving a wave to the crowd to calm them down.
Well, Quinn, seeing as how you've answered the invitation for the grand tournament, perhaps you wouldn't mind taking this opportunity to answer a few questions about yourself.
Okay, Quinn replied sheepishly. Her insides were roiling at the increased focus. Her heart would have melted at the joy Miss X showed in her smile.
Sounds good! So, Quinn, why don't you tell us about where you come from?
Quinn paused as she thought. She didn't want to give away too much of her past, a past that she'd left behind not even 2 days ago of shame and violence. Did any of these people know? What was she even allowed to say? Without the ring of the headsman in her ear constantly, she found she had little direction in her own self at the moment. She pondered. I come from a frozen world, where the sun is gone and fighting is constant. My people take residence in frozen crystals for shelter. There was an ooh from the crowd.
Sounds chilling,
Miss X continued, seeming unperturbed by the explanation.
And how did you find yourself in the Crossroads? I was on a mission,
Quinn continued, this time with more confidence as she found her voice.
My squad and myself had been deployed to look into an anomaly. I came upon a fox and there was a moment of clarity. I followed it and it led me here.
The audience remained silent during the explanation. Quinn looked at the sea of people and found herself unable to discern how they felt.
And that sounds thrilling!
The holographic woman continued. Her figure seemed to tilt forward to learn more.
And what about yourself? The audience is certainly interested in learning more about our mysterious armored fighter.
Quinn stared. Her unblinking eye reached for anything she could say. All she could find were flashes of combat, moments of violence. She had nothing.
I don't know, the Windraiser eventually replied. You don't know?
For a moment, Miss X's face slipped in just a hint of shock. Quinn had to fight from panicking, more condensation rolling down her face as little icicles formed under her ears and chin.
I have no memory of myself. I didn't even have a name before coming here. Quinn, I'm so sorry,
Miss X stated, her voice not carrying as it usually did, as it seemed the microphone was cut.
It is all right,
the Windraiser reassured. She looked at the crowd, who wore piteous faces.
I intend to use this tournament as an opportunity to find myself, to find my memories. The wish, when I obtain it, I will use to reclaim the life that I have forgotten.
Miss X sniffled, giving a warm and kind smile towards Quinn. She turned her head up and nodded.
A fine wish.
It started with a lone clap, then another, and soon a chorus of applause sounded over the crowd as they gave a solemn, respectful attribution to Quinn. The Windraiser stood there, not really sure how to feel about the praise and attention. It had always been commands. Go here, kill this, retrieve that. This was odd. She couldn't truly enjoy it either, as a nagging feeling danced in the back of her mind.
Oh, what a saccharine display of support for our lovely undead soldier.
Like a rumble of thunder, a voice cut through the air, slicing the would-be standing ovation in two to leave the mood a corpse on the ground. People in the crowd took on a horrified expression, and Miss X's face immediately soured. Quinn, for her part, simply turned her head to the source of the noise. A man wearing a cloak that stood in a suddenly forming pocket of individuals, giving him looks of disdain and fear.
Hey, what's up, Crossroads? Y'all are looking mighty juicy tonight.
The figure wore a nasty, biting smile like a wretched little bug. He used finger pistols as he stepped up to where Miss X and Quinn were standing. He spun around and looked over the crowd.
What? No applause? Guess my backstory ain't tragic enough for the audience, eh, gang?
And what are you doing here?
The hologram crossed her arms and furrowed her brows as Quinn looked at the stunned and silent reaction of the onlookers.
Oh, I just saw that we were having a little powwow and listening to all the well wishes for the suckers that have gathered here today.
He turned his head over to Quinn, his red eyes a distinct contrast to her light blue ones.
Sup, Berry Blue? I'm Nalagrom. I'm here to be your bad guy this evening.
He held out a hand that Quinn looked at dully.
I think it's pretty clear you're not welcome here after the stunt you pulled.
Miss X snapped, thankfully pulling away the man's attention.
What? I just want to keep you lot on your toes. Is that so bad, Crossroads?
With a flinging of his cloak, he spun dramatically around to the crowd that erupted in a series of boos and hisses.
Bah, who needs ya?
Nalagrom waved a dismissive hand before turning back to Miss X. A red sheet of paper unfolded in his hands.
But back to the matter at hand. I believe this invitation means I'm very welcome here.
Quinn noticed Miss X's eyes shoot open in surprise as she stared unblinkingly at the paper before her. It didn't last for more than a moment as her face switched back to being grouchy.
I see. Well, then I believe we found our missing contestant for the roster.
She started, a twitch in her cheek.
Crossroads, why don't we give it up for Nalagrom?
Another chorus of boos and hisses erupted, this time with things being thrown. The little hooded wretch posed and positioned himself with glee as though he were eating all of this up.
Thank you. You all suck ass,
Nalagrom said pointedly, wagging a finger.
Well, Nalagrom, since you're here, do you have anything you'd like to say before we get back to ignoring you?
He planted his hands on his hips and swayed them about in a sassy fashion.
I like to say that your personality is vapid and your outfit is tacky.
I'll kill you!
Quinn nearly stepped back in surprise as the hologram's form suddenly grew 3 times in size, her body molding and shifting in ways she'd never thought possible as she towered over the grinning little shit.
Save it for the winner's circle, Stretch,
Nalagrom replied, cackling madly.
But that being said, I do have something I'd like to say to Barry Blue here.
Quinn felt her eyes press together tightly as she witnessed his head turn and the smile dissipate almost immediately from his face.
You should probably give up now.
Her head in that instant felt like it had steam rolling around the inside of it at the statement. She didn't know if it had been the way he said it or the way he held himself, or perhaps just the name he'd suddenly given her. She was mad.
Excuse me?
Telling you to surrender, Barry Blue,
Nalagram reiterated.
You ain't gonna be able to win that fight tomorrow.
That's not my name.
Quinn replied, her hands clenching together as she focused her stare on the annoying little gutter trash. He shrugged.
Oh gee, guess I don't care.
You're confident for someone so small.
The Wind Razor leaned down, nearly pressing her head against his.
What makes you so sure you can win?
His infuriating little smile poked back onto his lips.
'Cause I can kill you with the snap of my fingers, Barry Blue.
She punched him. He didn't even have time to react. She simply swung her gauntleted fist and it collided with his annoying bastard face. He went flying, skidding to a halt at the entrance of the fox's den, where he lay on the ground completely still. 1,000 eyes turned to him, then turned to her. Not a word was said as his body lay motionless with attention hanging in the air. She could have died at that very moment and probably not cared.
Is he dead?
Miss X asked, perhaps a hint of hope in that chipper voice as she slowly returned to her normal stature. It was, sadly, not the case, as Nalagram shot up as though he hadn't just been sent halfway across the street.
Well, boy, howdy, Crossroads, we got ourselves one hell of an answer there.
He howled excitedly, his grin wild and mad as he flung his hands to the side.
Quinn, baby, here's to seeing you in the ring tomorrow.
He placed what looked like a rolled-up piece of paper in his mouth and lit it with a finger, taking an extended drag as the entire thing burned away to a crisp.
Enter you lot of jackasses ready to watch a slaughter.
He then turned the opening of his hood towards the crowd of the Crossroads citizens who'd been watching the whole display. He opened his mouth and a stream of billowing smoke poured forth, absolutely coating the now crying and rage-filled peoples of the Crossroads as they scattered from the street in a panicked mass. Quinn, now thoroughly uncertain as to what to do in the situation, simply watched as the crowd dispersed, leaving a chaotic mess of lost items, shoes, and some injured people scattered around.
You have your fun,
Miss X finally replied, her mood very obviously ruined.
Oodles,
the little bug man replied casually, turning to the entrance of the bar as though nothing happened.
Anyway, consider that little hit the only thing you're gonna be getting in on me, Barry Blue. 'Cause when we throw down tomorrow, you ain't gonna be able to touch this hot piece of ass.
His head nearly turned around like an owl as he stared back at the Wind Razor.
See you around, Quinn.
And like that, he stepped into the bar, his foul aura following him.
The nerve of that man,
Miss X hissed under her breath. She turned to Quinn with a sorrowful expression.
I'm sorry, Quinn, but I think I'm going to have to report this to my mother. If you want, we can spend some more time together later. Perhaps an actual interview?
Quinn smiled a little bit at the response, her mood drastically improving.
I'd like that,
she said quietly. Then, in the briefest flash of light, Miss X disappeared. She had become a streaking star across a brilliant sky that left the Wind Razor by her lonesome. At least, that's what she thought, until she heard the sound of a cat meowing that, at that moment, absolutely required her attention.
Okay, so I know it's a little bit awkward with Quinn's voice. This is the bracket where it's all women and I only have like 3 women voices. I have a new voice coming for her soon, I promise.
So why don't you tell us what you'd wish for if you win? And how did you find...
Wow.
Now that's effeminate. He held out a Quinn that... He quilled out a Quinn.
During a challenge like this, it's always important to remember what we're fighting, son of a bitch cat.